Do you remember the last time you saw a symbol and didn't know what it meant? Not a foreign language, but a symbol from your own culture that has evaporated. Think back to the smell of a public library in the 90s. That scent of vanilla, old glue, and a hint of ozone. You'd open a heavy reference book and see a strange curved mark in the margin that looked like a backwards P with a double leg. It felt authoritative, almost ancient. But today, if you saw it, you'd likely think it was a software glitch. Tension point 1. That mark held a power over the human eye that we've completely lost, and its disappearance changed the way our brains actually process information. But before we reveal why this ghost symbol was murdered by the printing press, we have to look at an even stranger mark, one that used to sit at the beginning of every child's alphabet, yet has been scrubbed from history for a reason that is surprisingly dark. In the mid-1800s, school children didn't end their ABCs with Z. There was one more character. You know it today as a shortcut for the word and, but back then it was a literal member of the alphabet. It had a name that sounded like a magic spell. Imagine the tactile grit of a slate pencil against a tablet. The sound is a sharp scritch-scritch that sets your teeth on edge. To a child in 1840, the ampersand wasn't just a symbol, it was a transition. It was drawn with a fluid, looping motion, a physical relief after the sharp angles of the letter X and Z. It smelled like the damp wool of a coat drying by the schoolhouse stove. But why was it removed? And why does its name sound so strange? It comes from a linguistic accident. Students would recite X, Y, Z and per se and. Over time, the phrase and per se and slurred into ampersand. It was dropped because it wasn't a sound, but a shorthand, a victim of the push for pure phonetics. But while the ampersand was losing its status as a letter, there was a symbol appearing in the margins of high society letters that served a much more scandalous purpose. You might still see these in academic papers today, looking like tiny ornate swords. But in the Victorian era, seeing a dagger next to a name wasn't just a footnote. It was a social death sentence, or a mark of profound grief that dictated how you were allowed to speak to the person mentioned. There was a specific reason these marks looked like weapons, and it involves a forgotten law of printing. Think of the weight of a Victorian hardcover. The leather is cold, the pages are thick and toothy, making a distinct thwump sound when you turn them. These symbols, the obelisk and diesis, were the heavy artillery of the page. They felt sharp to the eye. Printers used them because they stood out against the soft curves of standard text. They were designed to stab the reader's attention. If you saw a double dagger, you knew the information was not just a side note, but a correction of a previous lie. Eventually, the humble asterisk took over their job because it was easier to cast in lead type. But that shift towards simplicity destroyed something far more beautiful, a secret handwritten symbol used by monks that told the reader exactly when to take a breath. A symbol that vanished when we stopped reading out loud. Remember that backwards P from the beginning? That's the pilcrow. Today, it's a hidden button in Microsoft Word that most people find annoying. But for 1,000 years, the pilcrow was the most important symbol on the page. It didn't just mark a break, it held a secret about how the human brain used to function before the invention of white space. The contextual stack. Before the 15th century, paper was incredibly expensive. There were no margins, no indentations, just a solid wall of black ink that smelled of iron gall and oak bark. To find your place, you relied on the rubricator, a specialist who would go through the text with bright red ink, minium, and drop these pilcrow marks to show where a new thought began. The pilcrow is actually a stylized C for capitulum, chapter. It was the only thing keeping readers from drowning in a sea of words. It was a visual lighthouse. When printing became faster, the rubricators couldn't keep up. Printers left blank spaces for the red marks to be hand-painted later. But they never were. This left a dent at the start of the line, which is why we indent paragraphs today. However, while we were losing our red marks, we were also losing a set of symbols that told us how to feel about a sentence. Specifically, a mark that could have prevented every internet argument in history. In 1962, an advertising executive named Martin Spector noticed a problem. People were trying to express a mix of shock and questioning, but they were using two symbols. It looked messy. So he invented the interrobang. It was the first modern symbol, and for a few years it was the coolest thing in the world. But then it suddenly became illegal in the world of professional typography. Why? Imagine the 1960s newsroom. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the rhythmic clack-clack-clack ding of Remington typewriters. The interrobang felt like progress. It was the emoji of the space age. It was punchy, efficient, and sophisticated. High-end typewriter companies like Remington and Smith Corona actually added an interrobang key to their machines. It was poised to become the most important punctuation mark of the 20th century. It failed because it looked too busy for the clean, minimalist aesthetic of the 1970s. It was deemed unprofessional. But while we were stripping emotion out of our punctuation, we were also abandoning a specific set of architectural symbols, marks carved into the very stone of our cities that told a secret story about who was allowed to live there. If you walk past an old stone building, a bank, a church, a library, you might see a small, faint X or a triangle carved into a corner block. These aren't graffiti, they are masons' marks. But these symbols weren't just for identification, they were part of a ghost payroll system that could result in a man's ruin if he used the wrong one. The smell of wet limestone and the rhythmic tink-tink-tink of a chisel. To a medieval mason, this symbol was his social security number and his reputation combined. It was a tactile signature, meant to be felt with the thumb as much as seen with the eye. These marks were used to track who carved which stone so they could get paid. But there was a deeper, hidden set of marks used to communicate the quality of the stone to future builders. A secret language of the craft. As soon as we switched to concrete and steel, these blood signatures vanished, replaced by cold, printed blueprints. But that loss of the human touch in our symbols extended into our homes, where a specific looping symbol on the radio dial once connected us to a world that no longer exists. If you find an old radio from the 1950s, look at the AM dial. You'll see two small circled triangles at the 640 and 1240 marks. They look like a design choice, but they were actually the most terrifying symbols in the American home. They represented a frequency of last resort that most people hoped they would never have to hear. The warm glow of the radio tubes, the smell of heated dust, and the static-filled hum of the airwaves. In the 1950s, those triangles, the Conelrad marks, were the only thing between you and total silence during a nuclear strike. The system was designed so that all radio stations would go silent, except for those on the 640 and 1240 frequencies. This was to prevent Soviet bombers from using radio signals to navigate to major cities. It was replaced by the emergency broadcast system in 1963, making the triangles obsolete. But as the fear of the Cold War faded, we also lost a much older, much more polite symbol, one that was once used in every diary to indicate a secret that was too spicy to write in words. Before we had the end or simple page breaks, we had the asterism. 3 stars arranged in a triangle. It wasn't just a break, it was a hush. It signaled that the author was skipping something, usually something scandalous, or a period of time that was too painful to describe. Why did we stop using a symbol that meant silence? The feeling of a fountain pen scratching across high-quality stationery. The blue-black ink pools slightly at the tips of the stars. The asterism was a visual sign. It gave the reader a moment to breathe. In the 18th century, if you were writing about a tryst or a political secret, you would place an asterisk to tell the reader, "You know what happened here, but I cannot say it." Modern typesetting found it wasteful of space. We replaced it with a simple line or an extra return key hit. But while we lost the symbol for silence, we also lost a symbol for the future. A mark found on old maps that didn't show where things were, but where they hoped they would be. We all know the phrase, "Here be dragons," but the actual symbols used on maps were far more complex. There was a specific way of drawing a coastline that meant, "This is a lie." If you knew how to read the symbol of the broken line, you knew the captain who mapped it was guessing. The sound of heavy parchment unrolling, the smell of salt and old ink. A map wasn't just a guide, it was a testament of risk. The symbols were coded to prevent rival nations from stealing your trade routes. Map makers would often include trap symbols, fake islands or non-existent mountains to catch copyright infringers. Satellites killed the mystery of the map. Today, every line is solid. But as the maps became more certain, our handwriting became more chaotic, leading to the death of the most elegant symbol in the English language, the long S. You've seen it in old documents, the Congress of the United States. It looks like an F, but it's an S. People think it's a typo or a weird fashion choice, but the long S followed a set of grammatical rules so complex that it eventually caused a literacy crisis in the late 1700s. The heavy metallic clack of a printing press. The long S was a vertical, elegant stroke that mirrored the way people actually spoke, with a slight lingering on the sibilant sounds. There were strict rules. You could use it at the start of a word or in the middle, but never at the end. It was a visual choreography. It was killed by a single man, John Bell, a British publisher, who decided it was too confusing and simply stopped using it in 1785. Within 20 years, it was gone. But as we simplified our letters, we also lost a safety symbol that used to be stamped onto every piece of fine jewelry, a mark that told you if the gold was honest or a deadly fake. Before brands had logos, they had hallmarks. These weren't just for show. In some eras, forging a hallmark was a hanging offense. There was one specific symbol, a leopard's head or a lion, that changed shape every year. If you couldn't read the secret code of the lion's ears, you were likely to be cheated out of your life savings. The cool, heavy weight of sterling silver. The way the light catches the tiny indented stamps. To our ancestors, these were the blockchain of the 1800s, unforgeable proofs of value. Each year, the font of the letter next to the lion would change. 1820 might be a G in Gothic script. 1821 would be a G in Roman. We lost this literacy when we moved to mass-produced, gold-plated, fast-fashion jewelry. But there is one final symbol, one that you still use every day, that has a hidden twin that was deleted from your keyboard to stop you from being too radical. Before the comma, there was the hedera, a tiny ivy leaf. It was used to separate ideas, but it also represented eternal life. When you saw a leaf in a sentence, you were supposed to pause and reflect on the growth of the idea. It was a philosophical punctuation mark, the feel of sun-warmed marble. The hedera wasn't just a dot, it was art. It made the act of reading a garden for the mind. As writing moved from stone to paper, the hedera became too difficult to draw quickly. It was simplified into a dot, then a line, and finally the comma. We traded the life of the leaf for the speed of the point. And that brings us to the final reflection. Why these useless marks actually matter? Why does it matter that we've forgotten the pilcrow, the interrobang, or the long S? It matters because symbols are the sensory fingerprints of an era. When we lose a symbol, we lose a specific way of feeling. We lose the pause of the ivy leaf, the scandal of the asterism, and the safety of the radio triangle. Our modern world is efficient, yes, but it is also flat. We've traded the texture of the page for the smoothness of the glass screen. But sometimes, when you look closely at a dusty old book or a weathered building, those forgotten things are still there, whispering a language we once knew by heart. What is a symbol or a mark you remember from your childhood that you don't see anymore? Maybe it was a specific logo on a VHS tape or a strange symbol in your grandmother's cookbooks. Tell me in the comments. Let's rebuild the dictionary of what we've lost.